Hi, everybody, for this episode of A Guy with a Scarf. I'm happy finally to have with me Paolo Pescatore. Ciao, Paolo.
Ciao, bello, come stai?
I'm good. So, how can I
No,
define
facciamo in
Paolo?
italiano. No, facciamo tutto in italiano.
No,
No?
but some people suggest that I'd have to start doing things in Italian, but I'm not. And then you have such a strong accent in Italian that I'm not sure.
Je ne
So
sais pas pourquoi.
Paolo is someone who I envy a lot because he's always at the most important, best, most advanced events in the tech and innovation media industry. But yeah, so Paolo, define yourself if you can. And by the way, as we notice, beautiful jersey, even if not very successful lately.
No, it's a bit embarrassing to be wearing the top right now. Now I obviously come with my native mother tongue, so obviously yes, I want to be Italian, as some people would say. Thank you, Carlo. By trade, I would regard myself as an industry analyst. I've been doing this for about just over 25 years, and during the course of this time, I've kind of always believed in giving myself a kick up the backside, reinventing myself. I started off looking at mobile and specifically devices and technologies. That quickly then morphed into looking at the fixed line market, whether that was cable, copper, and obviously now increasingly it's all about fiber broadband. And then over time I realized with every new generation of network technology there wasn't much differentiation beyond obviously low latency and faster speed. So I then started looking at services, content and media, and now I kind of find myself what I believe is in a very unique position in being one of the very few industry analysts that looks at the connected user in the converged world. And for the last 7 or 8 years I set up my own practice, and prior to that obviously worked at some of the big analyst firms, and obviously have contributed to numerous reports, obviously forecasts, looking at the market. So now it's about doing something different. I'm very passionate, as you know, about what I do, and I don't know many people that would convert their living room into an experience center and actually compare a show that's being broadcast live and compare it to streaming between 365-inch TVs, numerous set-top boxes, tablets, and smartphones. It drives my family insane. They never know at times which remote control to pick up, but it's great to be able to live and breathe and actually practice what I preach.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, I could go on, but I'll stop there. I'll stop there.
I have been through the multi-platform phase of my life. Obviously, I've always been on the vendor side, and I was mostly, if you want, checking, troubleshooting sometime at very late night, NFL games on 14 devices in my home, but at least the family was asleep. So, so what are the, I just saw that you published that you're going to WWDC, so Apple soon. What is your attention today to be, if you're going a bit more specific, what do you think it's very important to understand today to be able to strategize if you're on the media side, if you're on the vendor side? What is going on, basically?
Yeah, look, and Carlo, it's a very broad question, and
yes,
maybe
yes.
if I were just to carry on with that kind of brief intro, and maybe talk a little bit about how I look and approach the market. I don't want to be a person that's chained to my desk and relying on secondary sources and trying to understand what's going on when I'm not actually out there engaging with key stakeholders. So I think, first and foremost for me, and in part in response to your question, it's actually very important to go out there and, attend events, big technology, media, telco events to get a real sense of what's going on. Now, I've got to know you specifically, focused in the vertical, say, of broadcast, media, entertainment, sports, and what have you. And it's fascinating that, I by trade am a telco analyst, and I've kind of morphed into looking at tech, and a passion of mine is around, of course, that media and broadcast. And when I look at media and broadcast per se, which is something that we have in common, there hasn't really been any innovation for a while. There's no real disruption. All of the disruption is coming from what's happening in the tech world. And obviously, I'm surprised it's taken this long, but AI is driving that disruption. And then when you look at what's happening in the telco world, specifically 5G, those are the forces that essentially, radically changing and driving innovation forward across all industries per se. And that's where all the focus of the attention is really resonating with.
But in terms of innovation per se, meaning those things that you read headlines like, our world will change forever in 2 years, blah, 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 and real adopted changes, I still believe that the smartphone is the thing that changed our lives. And it's not alone. So without the internet, there would have been blah, blah, without mobile. But do you see something that will replace the impact that I want to say what, you think so? I am very doubtful. So I'm not seeing it. Sorry, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. I don't know.
Or so how about these? Or how about these? I knew we'd come on. I knew we'd come on to it. How about these?
That's a different thing. Let me put you on.
Ray-Ban Meta AI glasses.
Yeah. So what do you think? So I don't think it will replace. Do you think this will be stuff? Because the problem is adoption. I've seen a lot of fantastic technology, but until they get adopted, like seriously or at a certain level, I don't see it really impacting. And this is especially important with all the changes the challenges that the media industry has. If they have to look a bit ahead, what should they focus on? The change of devices, the change of experience, the change of production. What is
again? It's a very it's a very broad. It's a broad question, and essentially, when you look at media and broadcast, and I've said this for a long time, it's still all about unique storytelling. It's all about content and having programs or a broad set of programming that people are willing to watch. That hasn't changed. That will always remain the same. What has changed in the lead up to where we are now is effectively the distribution. The distribution has fundamentally changed. And of course, we all know, the moves from satellite cable to fiber, and the direction of travel is evidently clear towards IP. Unfortunately, there are many vendors in this world, and traditional, shall we say, free-to-air broadcasters that have been very slow to embrace the change from the back end. And whether you talk about cloud or virtualized workflows, et cetera, and they're the ones who have been kind of left behind. Whereas kind of, it's hard to kind of call Netflix the new kids on the block, but that new way has changed consumer behavior. And so it's a mixture of the distribution clearly, and also the consumer behavioral patterns have changed fundamentally. And so you have that shift. And so I think, you know, ultimately right now, it's the challenge of how to serve customers across different screens. And, you know, many of the providers that have the customer relationship ultimately, you know, have to kind of reinvent the way that they also connect with customers, because obviously the move towards streaming and that land grab of subscribers effectively led to that big bundle being completely dismantled. And what we're seeing now, which I predicted many years ago, was effectively looking towards the return of the big bundle, but being delivered via, you know, IP. Now, you know, while all of this is going on, everyone is jostling position, you know, particularly the traditional media giants, as you well know, you know, are grappling with costs and the legacy business. So I think we're going to go through 2 or 3 years of transition as they kind of understand how to kind of, they move that value more towards that streaming future. And then of course streaming then has its own challenges in terms of delivering at scale, etc., business models, etc. So I think, you know, ultimately for those next 2 to 3 years, it's kind of, you know, the strategies have been set in stone, and it's about delivering on that towards that kind of all IP world.
But so as you're talking to, let's take one side, the media side that you were talking about, that, and call it big media. So I normally call it big tech, meaning even if Netflix, is it big tech? But so the big guys in streaming, I don't know how to call them, like Amazon Prime, then maybe Apple in terms of streaming. And then there is big media or media that have reshaped themselves in some way with the streaming offer. And then there is a fragmentation of offering, the sport vertical. So there is a lot of small streaming. When you talk to them, what is their, so maybe, and the three groups may have different worries. Are they worried about cutting costs? Are they worried about finding new customer? They're worrying about surviving. They're worrying about technology. What are they worried about?
Carlo, again, you know, there's a lot to it, and you can break down each of those companies, and it's very hard to even group Netflix in the same bag as any player, because, you know, I firmly believe just Netflix just stands on its own.
Yeah,
they've really Netflix has paved the way for everyone, and in the early years, and particularly during the pandemic and the post-pandemic world, everyone just felt, okay, well, you know, Netflix has got the playbook, let's copy. And what they've quickly realized is that they've not been able to execute because of the challenges that they have with the legacy businesses. So I think for Netflix, that you know, if you think about them as a business, the biggest challenge for them is how do they keep bringing something new and fresh to the market? Equally, you know, retaining customers when everyone is trying to come in and eat their lunch, because they're clearly, you know, they are kind of the leaders in the pack. But equally as well for Netflix, there's plentiful room for growth, you know, in markets that they, you know, excluding US, where perhaps it's perhaps a bit more mature, you know, but outside of the US, there are many millions of customers to go out there and acquire. So I think for Netflix, it's a different challenge. Then you've got the traditional media giants, where, you know, they made that move into streaming, you know, whether it's Disney, the Paramounts and the Discovery Plus of this world, and, you know, the branding challenges that Warner Brothers Discovery have, and the integration, you know, challenges that they have. It's an absolute minefield. And again, that's a great example of not how to do streaming. Let's be honest about it. So yeah. I think each of them have their own challenges in terms of how, you know, Disney particular, great content, typically great IP, great blockbusters, and but for them, how do they monetize it while with the legacy business? I won't go into all the details of all the other the media players, but when you then look at what you mentioned around that big tech environment, again, it's different. When you take Amazon per se, everything Amazon does is about driving value for a prime customer. And the strategy in the US is significantly different to the strategy in Europe when it comes to sports. And I've said this, typically when you look at the strategy in Europe, it does feel very much largely opportunistic, based on the value of the rights and what they could do. But what they have done in Europe, they've done a reasonably good job of providing the production and the value associated with the rights that they have. And I think, in terms of quantifying the opportunistic, just look at what they've done in the UK, what they've got into and what they've quickly got out of. So that's a great example. Whereas in US, it feels like they've gone all in on NFL, and they've exactly, as you well know, and they've really done an excellent job in that regard. Apple, of course. Sorry, carry on.
Then I let you go. I agree, and that was my, if you want, instinctive, less factual analysis, was that in the US, the big guys, let me generalize, are really going in strategically long-term on sport. While in Europe, opportunistic is the perfect. I never use that word in this context, but I think it's exactly what I observed, because you still saw, I don't know, Sky winning or DAZN taking. So they're not as serious, if you want, as they are in the US for sure. And go on with Apple. Apple is another case. Yeah, they're quite unique.
But Sky and DAZN as well. DAZN are the pretenders to the to the Netflix of sports, which again we can address separately or another day, because part of their problem, of course, is monetization. But one of the areas they're really heavily focused on is scale, and raising the awareness of what they do. And the recent deal with Fubo and what they're doing, and the tournament that they're going to be having the exclusive rights for in US during the summer is a perfect example of what they're trying to do. And then Sky, a different kettle of fish altogether, and they're starting to lose their dominance in terms of exclusivity, and they are going to come under increasing amount of threat. But while I'm on that, it's just worth noting, when you take a big market like the UK, and everyone looks at the UK market, the crown jewels of sports broadcasting is the Premier League. People have tried, but if you want to make a serious dent in Sky's position, you're going to have to spend a lot of pounds to kind of even have any say in that. But anyway, just on Apple, returning back to that point on Apple, look, I think Apple have started to become a serious player in the area of just TV in general. And of course, the Apple strategy, there's a number of elements to it. You've obviously got the hardware with Apple TV, which is more about the user experience and bringing everything together within the Apple ecosystem. And then, of course, you have Apple TV Plus, which, of course, starting from scratch, you're heavily focused on having a broad and breadth slate of programming, and they've now got to the position where they've obviously put some serious investment behind it, and they now certainly have that. Of course, now for their part is just driving the awareness and letting people know of the content that they have. And I think that's probably one area where they are struggling, and they need to kind of have a lot more focus and attention. And even with the, talking about sports, it's obviously one that we have something in common as a passion, with the global streaming rights to the MLS, which was, arguably a groundbreaking rights deal at the time, and it's kind of sets the tone for the way rights should perhaps be sold in the future when we're talking about a streaming-led future. Outside of the US, I'm not too sure if people are really fully aware that they have the rights and it's available on Apple TV. So I think each of the players have their own challenges, but there are challenges that they can address and offer scope for opportunity for all of them.
And I think what is interesting about not in this case, what you said about global streaming, because streaming is global by definition or by technology definition. On the other hand, the more you go in that direction, like, when you start new things, say, oh, we can sell our stuff in 200 countries, fantastic. And then you realize that as global is a component, localization, whatever you want to call it, regionalization, localization is still important, even if somehow Netflix has taught us that is not so important in some way. So they're able to create, a bit less, they're able to create global phenomenon with scripted content, with entertainment, right? So some series that they created work in most of the world. With sport, even with the most popular sport, I think it's a bit more difficult. But again, it's maybe you disagree. I think sport.
No, I agree.
People don't care. You don't.
But you're right, Carl. You're right. And this is where people will have very differing opinions. And going back to your earlier comment again, what is Netflix? Is Netflix a content company? Is it a channel? Is it a tech company? Because at the heart, it's a little bit of everything. And so, ultimately, they are looking to be the prime destination, and they are the leaders, and they obviously, have now kind of started to move into the area of, I call live programming. I don't quite call live sports yet.
No, not really.
Exactly, they're dancing. They're dancing around the area of sport. And look, I'm of the opinion, having seen a number of players make the huge investment, I'm of the opinion, and I would certainly advise Netflix not to go out there and go and spend, let's say, £5 billion on acquiring the Premier League rights in the UK. That seems a bit absurd. Now, if the rights are restructured in a way that it's on a grander territory rather than UK, then that could make perfect sense. But you can see why sports leagues, associations want to work with Netflix because of, the granular set of data, the opportunities for targeting and sponsored content. But I think the interesting thing with Netflix and what they've done really, really well is that they've been able to kind of set up content creation and production hubs outside of the US. And then try to kind of boost the economy and productivity in those countries. And, and some of those shows have been a global success as a result of it. Now, what I find really interesting when I look at this market, and I've been very vocal to a certain extent, how I worry for the future of free-to-air broadcasters. And the nail is in the coffin when you have someone like Netflix, millions of subscribers flocking to the platform, or whatever you want to call it, channel, studio, or tech platform. The moves towards advertising, the way you integrate in advertising, slowly dancing around the area of live sports. What I firmly believe, and this could be, ultimately where we're going when you look at live entertainment, and particularly what they're doing with WWE, I don't think we're far away from seeing Netflix securing the rights to a show that typically is on a free-to-air broadcaster, whether that be Strictly Come Dancing, Britain's Got Talent, because I think that could be a very much powerful combination. And that's where I see ultimately the move of what Netflix is trying to do in live programming, less about the sports because of the challenges in actually delivering live sport at scale to millions of customers. Now, there will, of course, be those selective opportunistic moves, but I think that's where we ultimately see the likes of Netflix and even the other streamers move towards that part of model in working with some of those big domestic TV shows where you say local is as important as those global phenomenon.
And how do you think the sport entities are doing? Who do you see, if you want to share your thoughts there? Who do you see like thriving?
What's your budget? What's your budget? What's your budget?
No. My budget is zero. My budget, no. Okay, make it simple.
No. It's look. You know,
don't stay high level. Stay high level.
Look, I think, you know, that's perhaps one area when you specifically look at the US. It's hugely fragmented, let's be honest, and there's really scope for, you know, rethinking the process of how the rights are structured and the way that they are offered. And sometimes it's a minefield to understand on which channel, if you want to call it channel. It's an absolute
where more generically where.
I think given the way that we are in Europe, and of course, you know, I don't want to be too dismissive of the other regions as well, but I think in the context of the audience, you know, again, Europe is so fragmented that, you know, the local players have a very, very good position and stranglehold. And given the costs that are associated with not only acquiring the rights, and the other area that people don't often think about is the production rights and the costs. The production costs associated with delivering each of those shows, and particularly when you have, you know, a big event, it can be quite considerable. So I think, you know, ultimately, you know, I hate to use this word all the time, but it's a company that has scale. And those that have scale are in a better position to kind of absorb that from that perspective. Having said that, you know, in the context of our conversation with streaming, you look, you know, the Zone is giving it another go at it.
Good way of putting it. Bravo. Obviously,
you know,
bravo,
you know, they well, look, you know, they failed miserably. You know, they learned some hard lessons in Italy, as you well know, Carlo. You know, they realized that they had to kind of try and get some form of exclusivity or get the bulk of the local rights. So they've tried to address that. They've addressed some of the technical challenges. And the next part of the story is distribution. Going back to the point around scale, you need to kind of be available on the platforms and the services that people are already gravitated towards, rather than having to spend huge amounts of money on marketing, which again is the Netflix model. You know, why was Netflix successful in the early years? They relied on telco partnerships. They weren't doing much marketing and awareness themselves. They let the telcos spend all of the money and the pay TV broadcasts to raise the awareness. So, but I guess the challenge ultimately DAZN has, which is the Achilles heel now, is whether people are willing to pay. And, you know, they can't give it away for free. Those promotional offers obviously come to an end. And in some of what we would call core markets or key markets like the UK, they don't have a strong rights position. So, you know, even what they're trying to do with the World Club Football Championship, you know, it's a smart way, you know, by positioning it as free. However, you have to register on the platform, and still it does, you know, create an obstacle for customers, and it's another destination for people to go to. So, you know, while on the one hand it's great making it available for free, but equally, you know, it'll be interesting to see, you know, the success from that, given that there wasn't much appetite from the free-to-air broadcasters to originally sign up to make that available in their own countries.
So on that, and you mentioned it before, I think in the Netflix discussion. How do you think? I also have another channel called Retention Zone now, because I think retention. I'm not sure today, but like 2 years ago, retention was like churn, and retention was the problem. Do you think it was a real problem for everybody? Do you think now the things are different? Do you have any? I mean, what's your take on the importance of fighting churns or retention compared to?
Look, you know, it doesn't matter which industry you look at right now, whether it's tech, whether it's telco, or whether it's media. I'm of the opinion there aren't that many subscribers to go out there and acquire. And so before you can even think about acquiring customers, all of the focus should be on customer retention. If you can look after your customer, that will extend the life cycle and the revenue potential from that customer while also reducing your costs. You know, every industry is struggling right now for numerous and well-known reasons. So everyone is kind to think about, you know, how do you then compete? Consolidation seems to be ripe. And obviously when you're looking to consolidate, of course, your biggest focus has to be trying to minimize the disruption for your own customers and trying to retain them first and foremost. Only this week, Vodafone and Free, two mobile operators in UK, came together and started trading from day one as a new entity, Vodafone and Free, biggest mobile operator now in the UK. Their focus has to be on retaining their own customers before they can start acquiring new customers. And I think that's the same for any industry, any player in the marketplace.
And do you think there is like an angle to it, or it's a combination of, because the more I talk to people, the more I understand it's a multi-faceted solution or issue and solution. So you need the right technology, you need the right content, you need the right whatever customer experience, customer relationship, you need to look at the competition. So it's a very sophisticated matter in my view. Or do you think there is more, someone in the room has more responsibility? Because when you say it's everybody's responsibility, it doesn't work. I mean, we know well, right? So,
well, you know, look, and if you look at the streaming world
yeah,
where typically it's been largely subscription, you don't want it to be another gym subscription where you sign up and you don't go. You know, let's be honest about it. So I think and the key part of the conversation has to be engagement, and you know, bringing the elements that you just talked about there, Carlo, really help drive engagement. You know, obviously price has to be the right product, and you know, and then you need to kind of have, you know, the right way of delivering and you know, the user experience. You know, there's a lot of user experiences that are absolute dreadful, absolute car crash. You sign up, you start using them, and then you feel this is dreadful. You know, I spent and this is a problem now in the streaming world, right? You know, you sat down, you're ready to watch something, you're scrolling around half an hour, you still can't find what you want to watch, and that's dreadful. And so, you know, all of those elements play a key part in trying to retain the customer. And of course, I come back to that comment, you know, and it hasn't really changed. And I think, you know, I've said this before, we are really in a golden era of storytelling. It's a great time to be a content creator, storyteller, because, you know, people want, you know, to be, that they want their imagination captured. So push the boundaries, push the envelope of what can be done. And then again, that's more end to end, more the back end, and using technology, you know, whether that's AR or visuals or spatial computing, or whether that's AI, again, in terms of telling that narrative. But going back to your earlier comment, it's a mixture of all of those elements.
And so, as you mentioned, maybe possibly last question, so I can let you go then. You mentioned content.
Last one. I had 2 hours I've set aside.
You said the word creator, and I'm thinking, okay, the famous creator economy. Is it a direct challenge or threat to the media industry, or is it a lateral, complementary? Will they merge? Will they stay separate? Will they be aggregated? Because at some point, you think, I don't know, something is moving, but not a lot. Like the gaming industry and the and the other sport and entertainment. Gaming is still kind of its world. I don't know. I don't have it, and we consume everything. So,
well, it's a fascinating debate, and you know, I think we only have so much time in the day.
Yeah,
and that I think is the biggest challenge. As a viewer, you know, you're obviously, you know, whatever it is that you do in your daily life, you know, and take into account listening to music, playing games, spending time with the family, or going out with friends, or etc. We only have so much time in a day, so I think, you know, that's where people value and those whole experiences, which incidentally, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see what Netflix is doing in kind of the Squid Games, the London experience now opening up, what they're doing in Las Vegas with a unique dining experience and pop-up stores, where building on the success of shows and actually taking that storytelling to allow people to immerse themselves in those experiences. Again, to my earlier comment about pushing the envelope, trying something different, seeing if it works or not. I think that's really fascinating. I think the whole creator economy, you know, when I look at my own world, and, you know, I'm going to be at WWDC, you know, I will be there and invited along with journalists and so-called influencers, and I'm seeing more and more influencers turn up. And so, you know, what is the role of the journalist moving forward? What is the role of an industry analyst or a consultant or an influencer? And, you know, it's so easy nowadays, you know, whether you have, you know, the iPhone 16 Pro Max or the Apple Vision, you know, NAB show, I saw Blackmagic Design release a professional camera that can now shoot for Apple Vision Pro. Then you've got, you know, you've got a plethora of devices now where, you know, I think you're a content creator, Carlo. You know,
I think so.
I aspire to be a content creator like you. No, look, I should be doing more of this stuff, and you know, it's a question of time. So I think, you know, when you look at all those YouTubers and the channel, the following that they have, you know, we're seeing the shift changing. And when you look at the young generation, you know, I have three young women, 17 kids, 17, 13 going on to 14 and 11-year-olds. And
so you're not spending money on focus groups anymore.
No, I don't need to. It's amazing, you know, how I'm going to an event and they're saying to me, "Oh, Daddy, this person was at, you know, at the Samsung launch or the Apple launch or what have you, or CES." And like I said, well, I was there as well. And so, you know, they're gravitating towards a social platform. So when you talk about the creator economy and you look at the young generation today, they're growing up in this culture where it's very much driven by those social platforms. And you can see the shift happening in the flow of dollars towards, say, the snaps, you know, Meta for Instagram, WhatsApp, you know, TikTok. And then, of course, you've got the ongoing geopolitical concerns, which we haven't talked about, which let's leave it for now because things are changing daily on that. But, you know, again, didn't want to provide a long-winded answer, which I have, but equally as well, you know, there are challenges in the platforms, that young generation, which are the future. Brands today, when we go back to bring it all together, brands today, irrespective of who you are, when you're thinking about the viewer or your audience, you need to look at how the young generation are embracing technology. First and foremost, that is the target audience, because it won't be long before they're in that category of 18 to 35, etc. And in that particular world, the way that they are using tech today will be radically different to the way that we are currently using it today. And you know, when you look at devices like the Vision Pro, when you look at the Ray-Ban Meta, you know, we're only at the starting point, the starting gun. You know, even AI, you know, it's not a technology that's mature. It's not dying anytime soon. We are only skimming the surface of what AI is, how that evolves, and what it will be. And you know, it's it might not be in our generation, Carlo, but certainly in future generations, it will be just second nature to all of them.
Yeah. The one thing that I witnessed myself, I went with my son to see the Kings League in the big stadium in Torino. And I didn't love it particularly, but one thing I noticed is the moment that the crowd really went and rushed to the border of the field, of the pitch, was not when the old Juventus legend came in. It was when those, to me, almost unknown influencer in football just came into the pitch. So I normally don't believe too much in generational lines. I'm a super digital native at my age. My dad is 89, he's creating stories on Instagram without being born in any of that. And I have 40-year-old people that cannot manage a spreadsheet. So it's not like bold lines, but I saw a gap. I have to be honest, I saw a gap there. But that's, again, a community, like with the gaming community, etc. So, or the concept of tribe. So I think it's much more sophisticated there. And I think it's fascinating, especially like for someone like you to try to understand what's really going on, because there is so much overlap, both in terms of media and everything that is happening, especially because in the end is about the time people have to dedicate to these activities. More than
and that's why, and just to bring it back again, I'm very excited about this category. I really am excited about this category. You know, when you look at dedicated VR, there are a number of challenges, of course, you know, when you put a dedicated headset on, whereas, you know, Ray-Ban have done a really great job of subtly bringing into market the functionality that people are accustomed to, being able to take a picture, record a video clip, listen to music, make calls, and now the ability to ask Meta AI a specific question. This is kind of version 1.0, which is gravitating extremely well with customers. And I've experienced the new Snap spectacles, as well as others in the market, Meta's Orion. And of course, we are a few years out before that true vision of an AR overlay on the lenses. But I am very excited about where it potentially goes with this. And a product like this, tethered to your watch, we may get to a point where we're not having to rely on the smartphone.
Perfect ending for me.
Grazie mille.
And thank you. Sorry if I started too wide, but the problem is that you know so much stuff that I had to go through a bit to focus more properly.
Well, look, we can look at doing a deep dive on a specific area again in the future.
On our paid channel that we will launch at the beginning of next year.
Who knows? You know, and that's one of the great things, Carlo, in you know, being able to kind of operate differently, think differently, and being able to cater for a specific audience differently. So, you know, yeah, who knows? Watch this space.
Va bene, grazie Paolo. Let's finish in Italian. Ciao.
Ciao, grazie tanto.
Buon viaggio dovunque tu vada. So che adesso viaggi per un po'.
Grazie tanto, Carlo.
Ciao Paolo.
Ciao, ciao.